This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
To She Wasn't Born Yesterday for women who are 40 plus fabulous by the Empty Nest Chicks. I'm Janet Evans, ex-M&T Saatchi advertising creative who have won numerous radio and TV awards. Not that that'll affect us because we're doing a podcast.
And I'm Dr. Amelia Haynes, who has been a medical doctor for 30 years and specialising in sexual health and mental health and relationships, and I'm generally a very useful human being.
Well, we'll find out about that, but we are here to work together.
People tell me on good authority that I am.
Really? Yes, well, they never say that to me, so I think we're the perfect hosts for She Wasn't Born Yesterday. Dr. Amelia, today we're talking about recovering from pregnancy loss, or do you? Pregnancy loss, it's a huge and underrepresented loss in family life, and how do people move on? We read recently that 6 babies a day are stillborn in Australia. And you just sit with that figure for a minute or two. It's such a lot. 6 babies a day, which is a higher death rate than our national road toll, which is phenomenal and hard to get your head around. But I guess first, to define what stillborn is, it's the death of a baby before or during birth, born at 20 or more weeks of gestation or weighing 400 grams, where mothers go through labour and delivery. And after 20 weeks, in New South Wales anyway, a birth certificate is issued, whether it's a live birth or a stillbirth, which is compared to miscarriage, which is the loss of a fetus before the 20 weeks. So usually miscarriage doesn't involve labour and delivery and no birth certificates issued. To help shed some light on not only what it's like to experience these devastating emotional effects of losing a baby, but to live it out very publicly, our guest today is former New South Wales Premier and Labor Senator, now CEO of the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation, Kristina Keneally. We're absolutely thrilled to chat with you today, Kristina.
Hello, Kristina.
Hello, Dr. Amelia and Janet. Great to be with you both.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And so, Kristina, it's possibly a little known fact about you, but in 1999, which was the year before the Sydney Olympics, which was a great time for celebration, you were pregnant with a baby girl, which should also have been a great time for celebration. What happened then?
Well, as you say, it was a great year in Sydney and it was my second child. So I'd already given birth to a healthy baby boy and thought, well, I got this pregnancy thing down pat. I'm pretty good at it.
Exactly.
And then as we went through the pregnancy, through testing, it became obvious that our daughter was not going to survive. She had a congenital defect that meant she would be stillborn. And that was shocking. It was shocking to me because I didn't know anyone who'd had a stillborn baby. And I thought, isn't this a thing that happens in your grandmother's generation? Isn't this done now? And also thinking, I'm a relatively well-educated person. How have I managed to land in my second pregnancy and not understand that this is something that could happen to me and to our family?
Yeah.
So what did the doctors tell you? How did they express it and phrase it?
It's funny you ask that question because I've later come to appreciate that we don't really have a great way of talking about stillbirth in Australia. And they worked this out during the ultrasound.
Yes.
Right.
And, the woman doing the ultrasound, she said, I've just got to go get a doctor. I'll just come back. She said it'll be fine. But I hadn't really twigged. My husband thought that something's not right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was fortunate in that the doctor who came back was both pretty direct, so there was no confusion. And I've subsequently talked to women who, say the doctors, they'll say, we can't find the baby's heartbeat. And that suggests it might be there, they just can't find it today.
Yeah, right.
Whereas it's actually, even though it might feel harsh, it was actually better to hear your baby is going to die. There is nothing we can do about this particular defect.
Yeah.
And And I think from there, it just all became a bit unreal. It was, you suddenly had to make decisions about when were you going to deliver the baby, because it was going to, and just things I hadn't even thought about ever. Then what do you do? Do you have a funeral? Where do you get a coffin that small? How do you mark the life of a child you've never even known? How do you explain to people that last week you were pregnant and now you're not? And where the baby is, and it just became really quite surreal for a period of time, even to the point that when I was going into the hospital, like packing my bag, there was this weird disconnect in my brain, as if I thought maybe she will be born, okay,
Right.
and maybe this is, the exciting moment I've been waiting for, even though I knew that wasn't real and I knew that wasn't true.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, when she was born, I remember the doctor, she looked at my daughter, Caroline. She looked at her and said, "Oh, you were not meant for this world." And, it was a beautiful acknowledgement of the fact that she was a child, that she had been born and that she was wanted, but she just wasn't meant to be in this world.
Oh, wow. Did that kind of, make you very emotional? Because I think hearing those words would be very difficult.
Yeah, it would actually give me a reassurance, that I actually had a baby.
Exactly.
And that sounds funny to say, but, you're going through labor and delivery. And usually when you're going through labor and delivery, while it's painful and can be terrible, and you are expecting something beautiful at the end of it. And I wasn't expecting anything beautiful at the end of it. So to at least have an acknowledgement that I had had a baby and she was a person and had existed. And that was quite comforting, really.
Exactly, because you have had 3 children. Like you have, you are the mother of 3 children. I can remember talking to another woman when I was quite young myself, and she had had a stillborn child, and she really hated not being able to say that she had 3 children, like having to edit herself to make everyone else feel better.
Yeah. I think, Amelia, that is one of the real challenges around stillbirth, and probably one of the reasons I felt at the time like I was the only person this was ever happening to, because we don't, until very recently in Australia, we haven't talked about stillbirth. And because we haven't talked about it, we haven't treated it as a public health problem.
Yes.
But it also means that people don't know how to react when you say, I have 3 children and 1 died at birth. And for a long time, I would only say, I went on to have another baby, my 3rd child. And for a long time, I would only say I have 2 boys. Until one point, I remember this, well-meaning woman, but also not well-meaning, saying, oh, but wouldn't you like a girl? And I first politely said, well, no, I'm happy with these 2 boys. But wouldn't you like to try for a girl? And I was like, well, you get the children you get, and you're grateful for that they're healthy and happy. And she goes, oh, but I think it'd be so beautiful if you had a girl. And I just said, I did have a girl. She died. She was born and she died.
How did she go?
Did that end the conversation?
She did not go well. That was the end of that conversation. And after that, I thought, you know what? It's kind of on me as well. I could have saved that becoming an awful situation if I'd just said, I would have loved to have had a daughter. Unfortunately, my daughter was stillborn. And that would have saved it from becoming an antagonistic, angry moment where I kind of thought, I was like, take the hint. Don't press it. Like, I've always had a view, people's family lives are complicated and personal, and there are things we don't know about them. Yeah. That was obviously not her view.
Yes, I know. Some people are just born intrusive, basically.
Well, I thought, but my life will be easier if I just own this straight up. I won't be forever trying to avoid it. I will actually own it and explain it.
Yes.
So that's what I started doing.
Kristina, how difficult, I mean, this is incredibly difficult for anyone in their personal life, but you're also a very high-profile public figure. So how did you handle both the personal and the professional aspects of losing a baby?
So I wasn't in public office when this happened. I didn't run for office until 3 years later. But I acknowledged Caroline in my inaugural speech, but I really didn't talk about it. And I really didn't make it part of my story as to who I was in my state parliamentary career. And I think that was partly because I didn't want to be seen as the mother of I didn't want that to be my thing, because sometimes you get pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Partly because it was very raw. It was only 3 years after she was born that I entered politics. And I just think also I just didn't weirdly see the connection between stillbirth being a public health problem and that I could possibly do something about it. And I know that sounds weird to say now, but we had so little attention or conversation about stillbirth. We told parents almost nothing. We almost just acted as if it was a private tragedy that happened and there was nothing that could be done about it. As I started to get more comfortable talking about it, as I got involved with the Stillbirth Foundation, as I started to understand there were things we could be doing as a country to prevent stillbirth and we're not, that I started to feel like, okay, I have a contribution to make here. And so later when I went into the Senate, I had a second chance at a political career. I'm not going to waste it. And I'm going to use this opportunity to try and make a change in terms of how we as a country talk about and do something about reducing stillbirth.
Is it something that can actually be reduced? Because if it's congenital effect...
well, there we go. Kristina is going to tell us, because indeed things, have changed, which is great. We need researchers caring about all of this,
So you are correct, Janet, that congenital conditions are still the leading cause of stillbirth. But even some of those can be prevented. For example, my daughter's condition, which runs in sibling groups, but they don't know if it's genetic or environmental. It's a rare condition. The advice was that there were steps that I could take in a subsequent pregnancy to reduce the risk. And so I did those things and was able to have a third child, a third healthy child. But then there are other risk factors for stillbirth, such as you can reduce your risk of stillbirth if you sleep on your side while you're pregnant and not on your back. Yes. In times gone past, we've told expectant mothers to count the number of kicks. It's actually not the number of kicks that matters. It's whether or not the movements have a change in the nature of the movements changes. So some babies kick a lot, some babies don't. It's more about, does the pattern change, or is there something really substantial you notice that changes? There are other things like reducing smoking and reducing drinking, managing diabetes, those things. But we've never told mothers their risks for stillbirth. We've told them that they should manage them, but we've never said, hey, these can lead to stillbirth. The other area that's really interesting is that we as a country do a really poor job of investigating stillbirth when it happens.
Right.
So only 40% of stillborn babies in Australia get a post-mortem examination of any type, and only 20% are autopsied. What that means is we don't learn what causes stillbirth, so then we can feed that back into clinical care of expectant mothers. And you look at a country like the Netherlands, where they said, we're going to examine every stillborn baby and feed it back into clinical practice. They've reduced stillbirth by 60%.
Which is huge,
That's a massive reduction. And so we're not talking about trying to find some miracle drug or some genomic. It's literally about better information, better continuity of care, and better investigation of stillbirth when it happens, so we can help prevent it the next time.
So why has Australia not done that? Because I thought whenever there was an unexplained death that there had to be an autopsy automatically.
No, not in the case of stillbirth. I think that, first of all, our hospital systems aren't really funded to perform stillbirth autopsies. We don't have enough trained pathologists to do pediatric pathology. It's actually also about training clinicians to talk to parents. And you can imagine, first of all, stillbirth is traumatic for the midwives and the doctors who participate in the birth, right? So they're already suffering. And then they've got these distraught, bereaved parents. And the last thing that they want to do is try to get these parents to agree to have an autopsy on their baby.
Yeah,
and
right.
so often it's just easier to say, oh, you probably won't learn anything. I don't want to put you through this trauma, or not even to broach the subject.
right.
I was quite fortunate in that my daughter was born at the Royal Women's Hospital here in Sydney. So it meant I had an experience that was probably best class.
Yeah.
But was certainly not typical of what happens around Australia. And so I had a really great obstetrician who was a specialist who did talk to me about why we would want to have an autopsy and what it might help us understand and why it might be beneficial. And so I did that.
Yeah.
What I subsequently found out later is that is atypical. That is not how we approach it in Australia. To the point that some parents have pushed for coronial inquiries into stillbirth in order to try and force the health system to make that examination. I don't think we need to go that far. I mean, a coronial inquiry looks for evidence of a crime, but what we do need to do is have the funding and the trained pathologists and the ability to have those conversations with parents to be able to say, this is why this is so important for you. It's why, I often say my third child owes his life to the autopsy that was performed on his older sister.
Yes.
And when you were pregnant with your third child, were you sort of anxious a little bit? Was there something in your mind?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the upside, if I can put it in those terms, is that the condition that Caroline had can be diagnosed very early on. She wasn't diagnosed early on, but it can be diagnosed early on if you know to look for it. So we had that test at 12 weeks and it was clear he didn't have that condition. Also, the condition she has runs more in girls than boys. So again, he was a boy. We knew that. We knew he didn't have the condition. So while I still knew there were other things that could lead to a tragic outcome, but I felt confident we didn't have that same risk.
Oh, that would have been a massive relief, wouldn't it? When he arrived, you must have been
It was
overjoyed, overwhelmed.
Kristina, it also strikes me that a lot of people who have lost a child, or anyone actually, for all sorts of bazillions of reasons, often want to set up a charity or a scholarship or something to acknowledge that something about that child, and that actually in talking to people about actually having a post-mortem, you're actually giving them a chance to say, you can make your child important, to the rest of the world. You're actually giving the child significance. So it's actually a great shame that that's kind of shut down for families.
That's right, Amelia. And, this again might sound strange to people if they haven't been through this experience, but even reading Caroline's autopsy report, it's one of the few bits of information I have about her.
Yes. Yeah.
When she was born, we took photos, we spent time with her, we have her handprints and her footprints, and we have this autopsy report, which is an actual detailed bit of information about her that really makes her a real person, and she was a real person. And you're right about the extent to which her legacy, in my view, is the fact that we were able to have a third child safely. And then secondly, we were able to make decisions about how big our family would be, what kind of risk we're willing to run of this happening again. I would have been less empowered as a person and as a mother without that information.
Yeah. I just really admire your first speech to Senate, Kristina, where you said, you told the chamber that while your daughter Caroline never drew breath, she enlarged your understanding of love and loss. Oh, beautiful words. She taught you to survive. She made you brave, almost fearless. Wow, that's a great speech. So how did Caroline's loss inspire you to create a Senate inquiry from that moment on? What led to all of that?
I think I may have set a speed record in the Senate for getting an inquiry up. I got an inquiry up before I'd even made my first speech.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I don't know. I know political careers can be long or short. I thought, I'm not wasting a minute. I want to get this done. I know they take time. I wanted to get it done. So I just went in and said, right, we're doing this. What was interesting, though, is going around talking to different senators. Two things I found fascinating. One, the number of senators who'd had an experience of stillbirth, either themselves, their mothers, so they had a stillborn sibling, or grandchildren that had been stillborn. And, in one level, it's not that surprising. It's 76 Australians drawn from all walks of life, given that there's 6 babies a day, 2,200 babies a year. It's not surprising, I suppose. But, I saw it kind of perhaps naively went in thinking maybe I'm the only one here that knows what this is like. Yeah. I was not. The other thing I found surprising was the extent to which most senators didn't know anything about stillbirth. And I guess it wasn't surprising. It was revealing. It was revealing in that it was like, here is this thing that happens 6 times a day, that is the number one cause of death of children under the age of 1, that is a mortality rate higher than the national road toll. And our politicians have no clue about it. We announce the national road toll every holiday period, every morning on the news. It's a strange thing we do, I think, but we do it. We acknowledge the road toll in an effort to try and drive it down. But here we have something that is killing more Australians than the road toll. And we're not even talking about it. So to me, the Senate inquiry was very much about getting the conversation going, acknowledging that this thing happens, and then trying to figure out what could we do as a country to reduce the rate of stillbirth. And what was amazing is we just had hundreds of submissions. I did not anticipate the hundreds of submissions from parents, some of whom had had a stillborn baby 40 or 50 years ago, who just wanted to tell their story and be heard. It was extraordinary.
And so what did the inquiry achieve?
So proud of this inquiry. It was produced a rarity in the Senate, which was a bipartisan, unanimous report to government, and then which was accepted by government completely. So there was no part of it where people wanted to have an argument or say, I like that, but not that. And it was this most beautiful point at which when we tabled the report in the Senate, the inquiry was chaired by Senator Malinderry McCarthy, a First Nations woman from the Northern Territory. And she actually delivered it to the Senate on a coolam, which is the Aboriginal carrier for a baby.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And awesome. She presented the report on the coolam to the Senate. And it was a beautiful moment. And all these different senators spoke, some from their own personal experience. It was amazing. But what's even more remarkable now is that we have a national stillbirth action plan in Australia, and it aims to reduce stillbirth by 20% by 2025. There's a Safer Baby Bundle, which is about the care and the advice that we give to mothers during pregnancy. It's been rolled out across every state and territory. There's a whole series of actions that are happening. There's some more that we still need to do. We're still not examining enough babies who are stillborn, but there's a lot happening. And last week, for the first time, we've seen a drop in the number of stillbirths in Australia. Some official data came out.
Wow, that's awesome.
It is amazing. If we achieve the 20% drop by 2025, that'll be 400 babies a year that are surviving that would have died otherwise.
Yeah.
It is.
So it sounds like you were in politics at just the right time and, everything sort of fell into place. It was meant to be. Caroline would have been so proud of you.
Yeah, I don't believe that things happen for a reason, but I do believe that, how you choose to respond to them is up to you.
Yes.
Back to that point about she made me brave. There was a point early on in my political career where something controversial happening. I kind of thought, so what? People were insulting me or something in the paper, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I had this view that if you can survive giving birth to your child who has died, and you can bury her, and you can deal with that trauma and the grief and it was traumatic and it was grief. But if you can survive it and learn to recreate yourself, you've got an inner strength that all the other slings and arrows of life, you suddenly like, you know what, I've survived something far worse than this, so
than someone criticizing your hairstyle or something.
Yeah. That happens.
I know.
Yeah, whatever.
Ridiculous. Actually, I was going to say that's a smaller thing, but it is something that people can actually grab onto and think, that's right. There's much worse things that can happen to me than just having to put up with someone being, a foolish git.
Yeah, well, let me say this. I think that we often talk about strength in very male terms, right? People are balls, or they, you man up or you muscle up. And I think there is a strength that women have in so many different ways. They, even the act of giving birth, no matter what the outcome of that birth is incredibly physically demanding, and then of course, women survive all kinds of things, whether it's domestic violence or sexual assault. And, surviving that and being able to rebuild after that is strength. And we don't talk about those things in female terms, but I do think we should. I think any woman who's given birth is incredibly strong. That's a strength that they can draw on in their other aspects of their lives.
Yes.
So in terms of support for mums who've gone through this experience, and for you even at the time, was there any sort of counselling or support to be accessed?
Well, again, I was very fortunate because I was at the Royal Women's Hospital. There was a social worker there. She was beautiful and amazing, and she really helped me both practically and with counselling. But again, that was not the typical path that most women with stillborn babies had, particularly then. Even in the Senate inquiry, we heard really terrible stories of how some of our hospitals in Australia don't even have the most basic systems in place to deal with when a baby is stillborn. So we heard some great stories about how hospitals would put, if they had a mother of a stillborn baby, she's still in the maternity ward, they would put a butterfly on the door. And that just meant anyone who went in the room, cleaners, food delivery, nurses, whoever, knew that was a room of someone who'd had a stillborn baby. So it meant they didn't bounce into the room and say, oh, how are you today? And how's the baby? Whereas we heard other hospitals where they had no system in place, including, one woman told us that 6 weeks after her baby had been stillborn, she got a call from the hospital checking up because she hadn't brought the baby in yet for its hearing test.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, how does that happen?
Yeah, that's terrible. 6 weeks after. But I had a friend who lost her baby to stillbirth, and a nurse bounced into her room basically and looked really shocked, really taken aback, and said, but where's your baby? And that particular friend of mine just turned to her and said, my baby is dead. Was really brutal to her, to punish her basically for bouncing in.
On the one hand, that's what happens, isn't it? Maternity wards. It's a happy place. People have babies and it's a happy place. But the reality is it isn't for everyone. And so Royal Prince Alfred, I know, has started a whole clinic that is around providing the counselling and the care and the bereavement support and the place to go back to when you've had an autopsy and to get your results in a quiet place away from the maternity ward. One of the hospitals I visited in Brisbane is the women's hospital there, does amazing things. So there are different models around the country, but I dare say we don't have a consistent approach to bereavement and support after stillbirth occurs.
And is that just, again, a funding thing, or is it just a systematic thing?
I think it's kind of that back to that view that stillbirth is a private tragedy. And, My mother-in-law had a friend who had a stillborn baby 30 years before I'd had Caroline, and she was telling me how they didn't even let her see the baby.
Oh,
Yeah.
And they just told her to go home and forget about it.
wow.
Yeah.
Like that, we've gone from that.
Yeah, right.
She was amazed the extent to which, Caroline was left in my room with me, and we could spend as much time as we wanted with her, and we were encouraged to take photos with her. And our parish priest came in and did a little ceremony to bless her and gave us a certificate, a naming certificate, and all these rituals that we had to kind of memorialize her, whereas literally it used to be, I've had a heartbreaking story. One couple wrote to me after the Senate inquiry and told me how they'd had a stillborn baby 40 years ago and they never knew what happened to him, and they were going to go back to the hospital and try to find out what happened to him.
Yes.
And you think,
Because they basically never saw him again.
they took him away.
It's just awful.
This view that it was better for you as the mother not to have seen your child.
Yeah. Interesting to know. You were talking about a First Nations woman before, but what other cultures do in this situation?
Well, I think there are some really interesting questions there, particularly for Australia, because we're so multicultural. It won't probably surprise you to hear that the rates of stillbirth are much higher amongst First Nations families, rural and regional families, and migrants. And it almost doesn't matter where you've migrated from. Your risk of stillbirth is higher. One of the challenges we found, particularly amongst First Nations families, is there's a really different cultural understanding of the death of a baby. And we heard some tragic stories about babies who'd been really left in morgues in the Northern Territory because culturally it was almost just too hard for the mother and the family to kind of come to grips with. And then there were some other structural issues around, the cost of funerals and not being able to, meet the cost, especially in those very small communities. Yeah, there are some really challenging cultural issues depending on people's communities. There are also there's a slightly different issue around cultural background. One of the things they've been looking at in the United Kingdom is ethnicity-specific birth charts. So the idea that what's full term for a woman of one ethnic background will be different than it is for a woman of another one. And so, for example, in Victoria, they realized they had higher rates of stillbirth amongst women of Southeast Asian background. And, they started to treat women of Southeast Asian background who were presenting with risk of stillbirth as full term at being at 38 weeks, not 40.
Okay.
And so they would intervene earlier. And they went from having a higher rate to having almost none.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So the UK have they collect data on the ethnicity of mothers and correlate that to when stillbirth occurs and why it occurs. And they've been able to develop these risk charts that factor in your ethnic background. And again, we're not really quite sure why.
No.
But it kind of almost doesn't matter. We know it happened.
Yes.
How do you communicate that to sort of very well-meaning friends, family, neighbours? I mean, how did you handle all of the inevitable questions? Oh, how are you going? When are we going to see the baby and all of that sort of stuff?
Well, we had Caroline before the internet.
Right.
And weirdly, the internet is one of the good uses of the internet because now when a stillbirth happens, often people will just put a message on Facebook. In many ways, that's almost easier.
Yes,
because you've just told everybody at once. You can then disappear if you want, or you can engage. It's up, there's a weird kind of benefit when these types of circumstances to social media. We did a kind of version of that where we essentially sent out a card we designed and printed to tell people and just to let people know. We did have a funeral, so those who were closest to us came to her funeral, and she is buried in a cemetery here in Sydney. So, we created a place where we can go and, spend, memorialize her And I'm quite, we have a photo of Ben and I holding her up in our home. And, we do talk about her, when my father died a few years ago, or my grandparents, it's right there, they have so many grandchildren, blah, 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 and she's listed. So, we do acknowledge and include her in those types of family rituals and experiences. But, as I said, I think amongst my friends and family, I've never shied away talking about her. It was more that sense of owning it publicly.
Yes.
That, to say I'm a mother of 3.
From everything you've said, it just sounds like just surfacing the issue. And, as you said, like 30 years ago, it was just, we'll just take it away and pretend it never happened. But so much of the healing and celebration of a life and part of your identity, who you are, is just talking about it and making people aware that this has happened and this is actually part of life.
And it's the only way we really start to address it as a public health problem, because it is a public health problem. Like, it's not good.
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
That this is happening, and particularly when we will never prevent every stillbirth, but we can, if we get better at the care we provide, prevent quite a few more than we currently are. And that's, I think, I said this in the Senate, there are things that we know that we're not telling parents now. And there are other things we could know if we actually made them a priority to know them.
It's interesting that the corporate world has only very recently acknowledged stillbirth as like something that you might have parental leave for. Like, there's everything else under the sun.
Well, and I would say it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent still in Australia. So the government paid parental leave scheme, like the government funded one, does acknowledge stillbirth, but a lot of corporate policies on paid parental leave are silent on stillbirth. And the problem with that is that then the decision is made by a manager, and you get wildly varying results because managers have wildly varying understandings of things. And the point I constantly make to people, it's not baby leave. It's parental leave. And parents of stillborn babies are parents. And if they're women, they have gone through labor and delivery, and they have to physically recover from that. They also have to recover from the trauma of their baby dying. And it is incredibly traumatic. They often also have follow-up medical appointments and other things that they have to deal with. They have to deal with things like organizing funerals and autopsies. One of the challenges around parents of stillborn babies is getting them back to work too early. You end up with presenteeism. They're there, but they're not really working.
Right.
And so it's not good for it's everyone's better off if the parent has proper paid parental leave and can fulfill their responsibilities as a parent to that child and to themselves, and recover and return to a better state of health. I think the worst story we heard at the Senate inquiry was a woman who only got her 10 days sick leave and was told to be back at work on day 11.
Impossible.
It's like she told these horror stories of how it was, and it was just hard to fathom how you could possibly do that.
I'd be presuming that, quite a lot of women would have milk coming in, and so you've got the trauma of that and the complications of maybe having mastitis and horrible.
How did you deal with it, Kristina? Or, is this still an ongoing process?
We are still campaigning in Australia. The Stillbirth, when I say we, I was the patron of the Stillbirth Foundation for many years, and they are still campaigning. And I did try to introduce a Senate private members bill to require it to be in the national employment standards. I think we will get there in Australia. And we've seen lots of companies make explicit changes and lots of big name companies, but it's not easy. I have had a number of really interesting conversations with HR people. I think I got into a Twitter argument with a certain yellow and black bank at one point.
Really?
And
exciting.
they have changed their policy.
Oh, good.
But it is that kind of, some of them like, oh, well, we'll give 4 weeks. I'm like, no. They're parents. It's parental leave, There is a birth certificate been issued. There are parents who have the need to, every parent gets their period of paid parental leave. Why is this different? They just have a different set of responsibilities, parental responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so you're out of politics now, Kristina. Why on earth would you want to get out of politics?
Look, politics is a wonderful profession, and there's a lot of good you can do in the world. But I've been in public life in one way or another for for 20 years. And I have to say, I'm really very fulfilled in my current role. I always say I took this job at the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation because, the same principles that drew me into politics drew me here, which is about making a difference in the world, about creating a more equal society. That purpose hasn't left me, even though I've left politics.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a nice way to live that out.
Well, exactly. It makes very, very sane kind of follow-up
progression.
Actually,
Yeah,
it
career
does.
progression.
It does.
Yes. Does it give you more time for yourself and your family as well? Because I can remember vividly, like my son was playing soccer down at Maroubra at Coral Sea Park, and one day I saw this tall blonde figure wearing a white coat running across the field, like towards the game. Like you were obviously late or something to
see the game.
Yeah, right.
Pick somebody up.
That's right.
The guilt.
I think that's Kristina Keneally.
There we go.
On the run.
She's running to grab on the run. Always on the run.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, no, it is nice. It is nice to have a bit more, a more sane work-life balance. I will say that. Yes, definitely.
There are different seasons to your life, Kristina, and
100%.
It's a new season.
It's brilliant.
I was about to say it's a better season.
No. No, they're just different. They're just different. Yeah, different.
There's parts of it that are much better.
Yeah. You're still rocking the green, by the way. Not everybody can wear that kind of green. You
George.
No, it's true. No, I admired that top you're wearing is
Our
amazing.
podcast is not about what people are wearing and how they look.
I know.
This is politics for you. Like, this is what reportage is about. What women are wearing.
Oh, 100%. Well, first of all, this color I bought because it's one of our hospital foundation colors, which are like a purple, green,
Good on you.
Like wearing scrubs.
You do a little bit, yes.
They do a little. They actually, it is a dress, but yes. But I will tell you, one of my favorite headlines from my political career was in the Daily Telegraph. Premier Keneally wears same dress twice.
Oh, please.
Love that.
Oh, dear.
How dare I?
I know.
That is a low point for that newspaper.
They're the pinnacle of top journalism, obviously, of course. That's usually reserved for members of the royal family.
I was like, really? I feel like Bob Carr wore the same suit a lot. Morris Yema, Barry. Come on, people.
They definitely wear the same ties, don't they?
Anyway, we digress.
Yeah, we have digressed. Kristina, we just really want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for talking about this incredibly important issue and for being such a shining beacon in moving things forward and progress for parents who experience stillbirth.
Yeah.
And a final word, but do you think you ever really deal with stillbirth, or is it something that actually stays with you forever?
I think it stays with you forever because your life gets divided into before and after, right? And I once heard someone say it's like I joined a club I didn't know existed, I don't really want to be a member of, and I can't get out of it. And I think that's true. What does change is how it impacts you. Of course, the grief is acute, as grief always is after a loss occurs. I think it's more the sense that there's always a kind of what if there. There's always a kind of a recognition that your life has been changed irrevocably. But it becomes part of your life story as well, as these things always do. No matter, lots of people have lots of things happen to them, and you eventually weave it into your life story and learn to live with it. And I think in many ways you work out how to make it meaningful in your life. Yeah. I always say I would never, if I could do it all over again, I would always want my daughter to live. But I can also look back and see how she changed me and made me into the person that I am today. And for that, I'm grateful.
Well, Kristina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristina. Yeah, that was very helpful and very kind and generous of you as well.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk to your listeners. And if people want to know more, they should visit the Stillbirth Foundation Australia website.
We love chatting, and we really look forward to all of our special guests and to just chatting with you guys. And we'd actually love to hear from you. You know, we'd love you to send us flowers. I'm a dark chocolate person. What about you? You're protein bar for Dr. Amelia.
I am. I'm so healthy. It's disgusting.
But, you know, we'd love to know if there's burning issues for you. Contact us on hopepodcast.com.au if there's issues that you'd like us to talk about or you really want explored or you think you'd be an expert on. Hit us up and come on the podcast. Come on our journey with us. We look forward to your company.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.